George III is one of the better-known British monarchs to ever reign. He is best remembered for losing the American colonies during the War of Independence and for going mad in his later years. As such, his brothers lived mostly in his shadow. In today's video, we will look at King George III's 4 younger brothers. Born on March 25, 1739, Edward Augustus was the 3rd child and 2nd son of his parents. Edward, as he was called, was born at Norfolk House, where he was also baptized shortly after his birth. At the time of his birth, the young prince was 3rd in line to the throne, behind his father and elder brother. As such, he and George were educated to a high level in different subjects, such as arithmetic, Latin, geometry, writing, religion, French, German, Greek, and even dancing. At 13, he was made a Knight of the Garter by his grandfather, George II. Edward sought permission to enter the Royal Navy and started as a midshipman in 1758. Under Lord Howe, Edward fought against the French at the Battle of St. Cast in the ongoing 7 Years' War. Eventually, the battle would end in the French victory. Only a year later, he was promoted to the rank of a captain on board the HMS Phoenix. In 1761, Edward was made a Rear Admiral of the Blue, and a year later, he was made Vice Admiral of the Blue. By 1766, the prince held the rank of Admiral of the Blue. Shortly before Edward's grandfather, George II, died, he made him Duke of York and Albany and Earl of Ulster. Only 6 months later, his elder brother would ascend to the throne of Great Britain. George III named Edward a Privy Councillor shortly after. From the day his brother became king until the birth of George's first child, Edward was the heir presumptive to the throne of Great Britain. In the summer of 1767, Edward was on his way to Genoa when he suddenly fell ill. His ship stopped in the harbor of Monaco. The sick duke was then brought to the palace of Honoré III, the Prince of Monaco. But despite intense care, he died on September 17, 1767, aged only 28. The room Edward died in is today still known as the York Room in accordance with his dukedom. His body was transported back to England on board the HMS Montreal and interred in Westminster Abbey. Prince Edward County in the state of Virginia, Cape York Peninsula in Queensland, and the Duke of York Island in Papua New Guinea were named in his honor. William Henry was born on November 25, 1743, at Leicester House, where he was also baptized 9 days later. After his brother George ascended to the throne, he was made a Knight of the Garter in 1764. 2 years later, William was created Duke of Gloucester and Edinburgh and Earl of Connaught. At around the same time, William began courting Maria Walpole. Maria was an illegitimate granddaughter of Robert Walpole, the de facto first Prime Minister of Great Britain. After courting for 2 years, William married Maria in a secret wedding at his home, Pall Mall. Together, the couple lived at St. Leonard's Hill and would have 3 children, Sophia, Caroline, and William Frederick. All of their children were styled Highness and received the title of Prince and Princess. William's brother, King George III, only learned of his secret marriage after 1772. William initially wished for a military career. However, his health and intelligence stopped him from pursuing his plan. The prince was instead appointed colonel of the 13th Regiment of Foot back in 1766. A year later, he was promoted to the rank of Major General and was made colonel of the 3rd Regiment of Foot Guards. In 1771, William was additionally made Chancellor of the University of Dublin, a post he would hold for the next 34 years. Tragedy struck William's family in 1775 when his second daughter Caroline died following a smallpox inoculation. At around the same time, over in America, the War of Independence broke out. William hoped for a position as field commander but was turned down by his brother. When in 1777 the War of Bavarian Succession broke out, William made a new attempt to serve in the forces of Frederick II of Prussia. George III allowed him to do so, but in the end it was the Prussian king himself who turned down the offer. William transferred to the 1st Regiment of Foot Guards and later became a field marshal in 1793. Ultimately, he became a general officer commanding the Northern District. William became father to an illegitimate daughter in 1782 by his longtime mistress, Lady Almeria Carpenter. He died at Gloucester House on September 4, 1805, and was interred at St. George's Chapel, Windsor Castle. He was George III's last surviving brother. George's second youngest brother was Prince Henry. Henry was born on November 7, 1745 at Leicester House and was christened there 23 days later. Unfortunately, that is just about what we know from Henry's early life. Fast forward to October 22, 1766, when he was created Duke of Cumberland and Strathearn and Earl of Dublin shortly before his 21st birthday. That same year, Henry became Ranger of Windsor Forest and Great Park. He would hold that position until his death in 1790. Also in 1766, he became a Privy Councillor, and a year later he was appointed Knight of the Garter. Henry entered the Royal Navy in 1768 as a midshipman on board the HMS Venus. He was stationed in Corsica until the French invaded the island. Henry would rise to the ranks and become a Rear Admiral and lastly Vice Admiral in 1770. You can say that Henry was the most scandalous out of the 5 brothers. It started in 1767 when there were claims that the prince married commoner Olive Wilmot in a secret ceremony. There were even rumors that Henry fathered a child from this marriage, Olivia Wilmot. Olivia would later go on to call herself Princess Olivia of Cumberland. However, Henry's paternity was never proven, and a jury concluded that Olivia had forged the evidence. Next, in 1769, Henry was sued by Lord Gorsvenor, a Tory politician, for adultery after he had discovered the prince and his wife together. Henry was found guilty and had to pay £10,000 damage to the lord. In 1779, Prince Henry entered a marriage with Anne Horton, the widowed daughter of an Irish peer. This would cause the ultimate rift between Henry and his brother George, who considered it a mismatch. Following their wedding, Anne became a member of the British royal family and was known as the Duchess of Cumberland and Strathearn. Henry's marriage to Anne prompted George to issue the Royal Marriages Act of 1772. The act regulated that all descendants of George II would have to seek permission from the reigning monarch to marry. As the act was issued after Henry and Anne's marriage, it was considered valid. The Royal Marriages Act of 1772, by the way, was active until the Succession to the Crown Act of 2013 was issued. The new act limited the requirement to obtain royal permission to the first 6 persons in the line of succession. Henry was the establisher of the Cumberland Fleet, which would later be renamed to the Royal Thames Yacht Club. From 1782 onwards, he held the senior position of Admiral of the White. Henry died on September 18, 1790, and was buried in Westminster Abbey. George's youngest brother was Prince Frederick William. He was born on May 13, 1750 at Leicester House and was christened there a month later by the Bishop of Oxford. The brother's father died when Prince Frederick was not even a year old. Throughout his life, Frederick would spend most of his time reading books. Contemporaries described the young prince as intelligent. Sadly, Frederick would not have a long life. The boy, who was in poor health all of his life, passed away shortly after Christmas 1765, aged only 15.